Professor Lee, I understand you're interested in Asian values, but so far as I know, you're one of the most cosmopolitan philosophers because you spent 13 years in Germany. And also, I think I would also characterize you as a public intellectual, in the sense you're politically concerned and socially engaged, and also culturally very sensitive. You involved in student protests and so forth. But you also have held very important positions in promoting the study of philosophy. I was greatly honored to take part in the Congress in 2008, organized by you and your colleagues. I think for the first time, the Congress since 1900 was held in Asia. So obviously, this, if not an Asian turn, at least a very profound interest in Asia. So the question of Asian values was debated, taught in the 80s, so-called Japan and Four Million Dragons. And now you, in a way, revitalized that discussion with a view to the future. So I'd like to know a little bit.
Yes, Professor Tu Weiming, I am very pleased and honored to meet you here. Both of us have been involved in the FISP, Federation of International Societies of Philosophies, as an executive board members. But we are both Asian and East Asians, and we are in good dialogue with Western philosophers and also African and Latin American philosophers.
Yes.
But we're talking about intercultural dialogue very much, but I think understanding the other culture is important, but in order to have efficient dialogue with other cultures, one must know his own culture first. And as for Asians, we have had many good Asian traditional philosophies and Asian values, but we are sometimes very lost what our identities are, and we have been very much suffering under the Westerners' influence and colonialism, and we have had quite much inferiority complex also. Now in the 1980s and 90s, since especially the East Asian countries like Singapore and Taiwan and South Korea and Hong Kong have achieved some industrialization and economic development, and now they have begun to talk about Asian values in relation to the industrialization and economic development. In the 1990s, I think I remember that you have come to Korea and talked about the revival of Confucianism and discussed about Asian values in relation to Confucian democracy or even Confucian capitalism. But since 1997-8, when this Asian financial crisis came, and then again this Asian value have been devalued and then very much criticized and blamed for so-called crony capitalism or some kind of corruption and failure of the rationalist societies. So for some time we did not talk much about the Asian values, but nowadays again I find in Korea some kind of revitalization of discussions, not just in relation to the democracy or the capitalistic economy, but now Asian countries also, including China, now followed up the industrializations and then also competing with the Western countries. But we are faced with the kind of crisis, both economic, environmental, and social problems. So We need to find out real alternative value systems to overcome this kind of crisis. And then why not from our ancient philosophies and ancient values, from some Taoistic or Buddhistic, some naturalistic ideologies and some spiritual thoughts, we have maybe enough resources of that which have not been understood quite well or interpreted quite well. So now we think that we have to start again to find out these resources. In this regard, Professor Tu, when you have done a lot, I know, and then you are doing still very much in digging these resources.
Well, thank you. I think for a long time, let's say ever since the May 4th generation of 1919, of course there was the March 1st movement.
1919, March 1st, yes, in
Earlier
Korea.
than May 4th. There's been concerted effort to try to learn from the West in order to strengthen East Asia, both in terms of wealth and power. And that process has been going on even today. So for a long time, the overall concern is how can we modernize, which means how can we learn from the advanced industrial societies like the United States and European countries. I think now a new horizon, maybe a new issue is arising. That is, we've learned from the West, but when we begin to tap our own cultural resources, as you pointed out, and whether these cultural resources will only be mobilized in order to emulate the West. In other words, these cultural resources are judged in terms of their values, only in reference to the utility of the modernizing process defined in Western terms, defined in wealth and power. So the question is, China, for example, has been successful economically since the reform and open period 30 years ago. And so the voice, China's voice has been heard. But what is the cultural identity? Whether the cultural identity is simply imitation of some imported ideas from the West, or the identity can develop certain kind of fusion between Asian values, so-called Asian values on the one hand, and the Western values. I would simply say universal values should be understood as originated geographically in some specific areas. Some values, such as human rights, they have deep roots in Western civilization. But that local culture now has become globally significant. At the same time, some Asian values, such as compassion and sympathy, originally rooted in Buddhism or in Confucianism, and now they also become globally significant. So a new challenge for us is probably the dialogue between core values on an equal basis, sharing ideas, rather than, say, in a totally asymmetrical situation, learning from the West in order to gain some confidence with us.
But as you know, our Asians, especially East Asians, have come through the modernization and democratization process, and learning from the Western European or American model of democracy, we have been criticizing our own tradition and customs quite seriously. And of course, we had to overcome our feudalism and traditional authoritarian rules and suppression of women, or many kinds of irrationalistic and undemocratic rates of the traditions are still remaining in our societies.
Sure, absolutely.
So through our this modernization and westernization process, we have already critical view of our traditional values, especially Confucianism. Since Confucianism has ruled over our country, for example, in Korea, at least 600 years since the Li dynasty has been the state religion and had suppressed also Buddhism and the Taoism and the shamanism, and has protected against the Christian missions. Also, Catholic mission has been completely sacrificed under this Confucian rule. So, in some sense, quite reactionary ideologies.
Intolerant.
Yes, intolerance also. So, still in our intellectual discussions, that many says that we have to still overcome more the rituals and customs of Confucianism. And some says that Confucianism must die in order to make our life and country live. Very provocative words, but still some are very much agreeing with that ideas. But question is, have we really rightly understood our tradition and value? That is a question. There has been many distortions, and then political rulers and ideology have been always negative. In even the Christian countries, Christian religion has been also very reactionary and very suppressive, but there is also many positive values which we have to respect. So in this regard, it was not very fair to understand and evaluate our traditional values. I think in this regard, you have done quite much to recover these lost values of Asian traditions and philosophies. So, what is your reflection now? You have been teaching in Harvard a long time to the Western American people about this Chinese and then Asian values. I hope to you could continue, but I would like to learn more from your experiences.
Well, I think of all the East Asian countries, China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and of course Vietnam is in Southeast Asia, and we say Singapore, and the Chinese diaspora, Chinese all over the world, maybe the Korean diaspora or Japanese diaspora. Korea, or cultural Korea, could be considered the most Confucian of all other societies.
Oh, yeah.
There's no question about it, it's clear. I first visited Korea in 1967, and I met Professor Yi Sang-un.
Oh, yeah.
I was given a collection of complete work of Yugok, and I began to read
Yugok.
And then I visited Korea in 1978 at the invitation of the International Society of Twiggy Studies. So ever since then, I've been back to Korea many times. I consider, for example, my study of Korean Confucianism, especially, and Yugok and we call him Yi Huang, and Yugok, and absolutely critical for my own understanding of the Confucian tradition, because Korean Confucianism, in a way, is significantly different from Confucianism either in China or in Japan. And I also think the development of Confucianism in Korea is most thought-provoking for understanding the modern transformation of Confucianism. I did the first conference on Confucian ethics and organization of East Asia was held in Busan. Professor Yi Sang-un actually organized it. It's even before the so-called Hakuin conference in Japan. So there's no question about the fact that people became critically aware of the negative features of Confucianism, lack of transparency, certain kind of collusion between the government and the chaebol in companies, and nepotism, and factional strife, and also authoritarian mechanism of control, and power of domination of the male over the female in these things. But I think ever since the 19th century, late 19th century, Confucian scholars in China, in Korea, and in Japan began to reflect critically upon their own traditions. And they used the criteria from the West, such as liberty, rationality, legality, due process of law, even rights, and of course democratic ideas, and science and technology, these great Western values, and to try to transform the Confucian theories and practices in order to adapt to the new situation. And Korea has done a great deal in doing that. And there's a very powerful moral sentiments among the Koreans in order to establish Korea as independent, autonomous, and forward-looking country, and vis-a-vis the colonialism and imperialism of the West, and more seriously of Japan. And of course China shared the same fate. And so in that process, the Confucian tradition has been radically transformed. So we're now talking about the Confucianism in the 20th century with a view toward the 21st century. It's not possible for a modern Confucian to accept the authoritarian mechanism of control of the, in terms of male domination, authoritarianism, and so forth. But in terms of the habits of the heart, not consciously arguing, but habits of the heart, these negative features still exist, I think. So I fully understand the notion that Confucianism, or Confucius must die so the country can live. And there's another position, of course, Confucius will have to exist or have to live so the country will be able to flourish. Two very different positions. And China, for a long time, really believed that unless the Confucian tradition was eliminated, China could not become modern, could not become progressive, could not become a democratic system. And recently, because the quest for cultural identity, and many scholars and people in general, but certainly students, begin the question about re-evaluation of the Confucian legacy. My position for the last 3 decades or even longer is basically to understand. My purpose is not to promote promotion or propagandizing or evangelizing. This is something that I consider negative. I need to understand, but the understanding is predicated on the belief that on the one hand, you're critically aware of the limitations, but at the same time, you need to recover the core values, and especially those values that will continue to be meaningful and transformative in the modern times. The only way to criticize the negative features is to retrieve some of the most positive values. The only way may not be right, an appropriate way. If you use ideas totally from alien sources, and you believe you can simply eliminate your cultural tradition, it is too easy, too naive, because if you do that, the habits of the heart, the kind of unreflective habits will continue to haunt you. So what we need to do is both to retrieve the cultural values and to critique them. And that would serve as a basis to understand the West, at the same time to reject some of the negative features of the West. And I think we're now in a new sort of joint venture, look to in the future. And Korea serves as perhaps the most important example. And China is very much behind. China is trying to catch up. Right?
I don't know very well.
I agree with you. Look at the common phenomena. Often I use the example, the 1001 with Tui, which is a cultural symbol. This is unimaginable in the Chinese cultural context. It would take quite a while. And so Confucian values, positive and negative, are so much an integral part of the Korean everyday life in terms of leadership, terms of human relationships, in terms of relationship between human to the world beyond. Even now Korean is very pluralistic in terms of belief systems, more than 30% Christians, and probably more Mahayana Buddhists. The importance of shamanism continues, and Confucianism is intertwined with all of them. A Korean Christian is very different from American Christian. Now the Korean Christians now go to the United States to missionize because they don't believe the Americans are truly authentically Christian. So my sense is
Bank of Korea has produced newly the new money, 500 50,000 won. That's the highest the currency. And they have printed the portrait of the mother of Yulgok, Shinsaimdang.
Yes.
There,
she's a famous poet.
Yeah, she has been very important poet, popular, very famous poet, also very good educator and very big influence of Yulgok. So, as a first woman who on the money, on the paper money.
But Yulgok, maybe 5,000 won with Yulgok.
Yeah. You know better than. Well, as you know, I myself am not a Confucian philosopher or any of Oriental philosophy. I have been more interested in Western philosophy, and I'm grown up since the independence from Japan, and I needed to know what directions our country should go, And then Korea was divided between capitalism and socialism, and the ideological conflict, and so democracy and social reform and then unification, and these were the goals and targets of our generation from my childhood. So I had to go outside to learn, so to Germany, and then philosophical traditions of Kant, Hegel, and Marx, and then critical theories of Frankfurt schools and Habermas was my study lines. But nowadays, since we are looking for the our own identities, I'm now reflecting over the philosophical learnings from my teachers. So when I was a student at Seoul National University, I have been very much influenced by Professor Park Jong-hong. I don't know whether you know him. He was my teacher, and he was an expert both in Western philosophy and Oriental philosophy. And he has really learned seriously of traditional Korean philosophy. And I have listened to his lecture over 3 years on the history of Korean philosophy. That was his first initial teaching. And then teaching on Taege and Yulgok, and then comparing with Kant and Hegel, here in our tradition we have also rationalism and empiricism and positivism. And he could compare, both. And then why should we learn only from the Kant and Hegel, and especially from the Peking? He was going to write a book on the dialectical philosophy, quoting on the Peking, the philosophy of Peking as a kind of Oriental dialectical methodology. He has not finished it, that he died, but and then now when we are just reading slowly about these kind of resources that I can find, we can find from even Korean traditional philosophy enough resources to think about these modern problems and dialectical problems, conflict resolutions, and then mutual life, and then also ecological sustainability. Even though it's late, let's learn something.
You spent 13 years?
Yes, 13 years in Germany, at University of Göttingen.
You received, I'm sure, one of the most thorough education of any Asian scholars would be able to do. And so your familiarity, now you mentioned especially with German idealism, or these giants, and also, of course, more than that, you're interested in political theories, and so follow the philosophical development of the West all the way to the contemporary situation. And when you begin to reflect on your own cultural identity and addressing issues of Asian values, your perspective is significantly different. And so you manage to raise new questions and offer new insights into this whole process. So my sense is that overwhelming majority of philosophers in East Asia are familiar, not necessarily thoroughly seasoned like you, but familiar with what's going on in the West. Whereas some of the most brilliant Western minds, including Habermas, Derrida, Foucault, but also many other contemporary scholars such as Levinas, and so forth, were basically ignorant about the rest of the world, so the West and the West. And this is, of course, a historical moment that's difficult to change. And I have to say, their ability to dig deeply into their own cultural tradition. This, no matter how radical you are against the philosophical traditions of your own, such as Heidegger, each one of them was totally seasoned in the whole Western philosophy, from Plato, Aristotle, all the way to the modern times. So that's part of their genealogy. That's why their philosophy is so moving, thought-provoking, inspiration. And whereas many of the scholars in East Asia are overwhelmed by the West and had no confidence whatsoever in what their own tradition presented, and rejected these traditions in a very proud, certainly arrogant way. So what happened is that they received some wisdom from the West, secondarily, because that great tradition of the West, all the way from Plato to the modern times, was somehow absent. And they also abandoned their own tradition. So in that situation, it's very difficult to be creative. I think philosophical creativity is not like something that is being created ex nihilo. It's not from nothing. But so I think one lesson we learn is that we don't return to our tradition for its own sake. We have a different problematique, and we know we have to learn much more about the West in order to enrich our life of the mind. At the same time, we know we have resources. Whether we study it or not, it's part of our life. These resources now need to be elevated to the conscious level. I think what you're doing is precisely to, with this very deep and profound involvement in Western philosophy, and begin to think about so-called Asian values. And you raise questions that are thought-provoking for scholars in East Asian studies, but at the same time challenging to Western scholars. I believe that the kind of local knowledge, let's say the Confucian tradition is a local knowledge or a regional knowledge in East Asia, it can become globally significant through effort. It's not going to do it if there's no enough philosophical input into the process. Part of the reason why overwhelming majority of forms of local knowledge that are globally significant originated in the West. The now school is now emulated, something developed in Paris, developed in London, or in Cambridge, Mass. They become universal. So I think the time is right for some Asian scholars to begin to think that some of their forms of local knowledge, very deeply rooted in Asia, can also become more than Chinese, East Asian, Korean, and will be able to share with a larger world community. My sense is that they now are ready to listen. Habermas is a good example. Yeah, he said, well, we have many, many things in common. And he said, I know you're in the new Confucian world, but there are still differences. For example, he feels that the new Confucianism, like we know, it's difficult for the Confucian tradition to develop indigenous, so democratic ideas, or constitutional democracy, or the idea of the dignity of the person linked to human rights. I agree with him in terms of genetic reasons. Historically, that was not the case. But I don't believe that's the whole story. Another part of the story, if a tradition is like a flowing stream and continues, then there are also possibilities can open up. Because we've confronted something radically different. And the notion that radically different, so the radical otherness, may be a liberating experience for us. So I think we are more or less bilingual or trilingual. And so we need to take advantage of that and not in any patriotic or nationalistic way. So I think I agree with many people that we have to go beyond China-centered or Confucian-centered world. But we need to enter into a dialogical mode with a certain kind of, not self-confidence, but a certain kind of preparedness for this kind of encounter.
I have been also motivated to, to learn more about our own selves, especially through my work in UNESCO.
Yes.
I have been working for UNESCO the last
for
8 years. Yes. First, as a first founding director of Asia Pacific Center of Education for International Understanding. We have brought from 45 Asian Pacific countries teachers and then civil society leaders to educate them about educate international understanding, intercultural understandings. And last 4 years, I have been Secretary General of Korean National Commission for UNESCO, involving in many UNESCO.
By the way, you have to be congratulated because it's one of the most vibrant, most comprehensive UNESCO programs in the world, not just in East Asia.
Especially on these cultural diversities and the philosophical, the popularization of the philosophy also. I have traveled many countries in Asia Pacific, and talking about the cultural diversity. And I felt that, our East Asian, especially Chinese and Korean, Japanese, I have been very much proud and thankful of our forefathers who have kept these good traditions. And, we have our own letters and languages and then literatures. In many countries in Asia, they have lost their languages and their letters and then philosophical thoughts. Then it's very difficult to develop, understand its own identity, and also they are influenced by the Westerns and then monopolized and really overruled by the foreign thinkings, and without having the power of self-reflections and then self-digesting. So in this regard, I think East Asian traditions, our long tradition of Confucianism and Taoism, Buddhism, I think it can be a good model in this new world of globalizations, how to cope with this kind of monopolized globalizations, And then we need to find out in cooperation with each other, what our commonalities and common traditions of Asian religions and philosophies. Last year, when we hosted the 22nd World Congress of Philosophy, first time in Asia, in Seoul, Korea, I was very glad to have so many philosophers from China and Japan, especially Asian countries, came. Over 800 people came from East Asian countries. So we have had also a special meetings, seminars among the East Asian countries, including Taiwan. So we decided to meet annually, but it's not followed up yet. But I hope we could strengthen our networks and then dialogues among ourselves, because even between the China and Japan and then Korea, we did not have much about the common search on our common traditions, even though we have influenced each other. So I think it's now time we have to strengthen this network and collaborations, maybe through FISP or through the scholarly corporations. I think we can really identify and find out good values and traditions which we did not recognize until now.
I think since the Second World War, I would say, and since the rise of the United States as the most powerful, not only military, political system, but culturally also quite vibrant. So people said America is the combination of Rome and the Greek civilization. I think one thing happened, that all East Asian societies, maybe all Asian societies, begin this bilateral communication between Korea and US, between Taiwan, China, Singapore, India, and in a way that horizontal communication among these countries, even though we call them part of the Confucian cultural area, these horizontal communications are not good enough. And right now, it's the time to do that. An attempt to do it was made a few years ago when the presidents of 4 universities, Peking University, Seoul National, Tokyo, and Hanoi University, decided to have an annual meeting of the 4 presidents. And they use 4 languages with the translations. Without English, you speak your own native language, and to try to formulate some joint projects. But this is the beginning. And what you're talking about as network. And of course, some scholars like in Japan, and there's an attempt to develop a kind of network of East Asian religious studies. Shimazono was the one who's doing it. So I think I would like to see not only more communication, but a new problematique. Why are we doing it? We're doing this certainly not as a response to the challenge of the West alone. That's only part of it. We do it with a view to the future, and hopefully a joint enterprise. We make some positive contributions, and this joint enterprise is going to be universally significant. Amartya Sen published a book entitled Argumentative India. And if I want to do something comparable, I would say dialogical East Asian. The mode of the 2 important features. One is all these societies are learning societies. And this is, of course, deeply rooted in the Confucian tradition. The opening line of the Analects is to learn. But these societies also cherish dialogue rather than dialectic. Sometimes dialectic means you have to overcome the 2 sides to get to a higher level. Dialogical means I recognize not only the integrity of your existence, I respect, I will serve as a mutual reference, mutual learning, and I don't want to overcome you or try to change you as you are. So the more I understand you, the more I become self-reflexive, more able to extend my horizon. I hope you do the same, that kind of interaction. And some scholars believe, I think historically quite verifiable, that there was an international community in East Asia through maritime, through the so-called ritual system, we call it Caogong ritual system. And so, of course, now Japan began to talk about, we call it Dongyang Gongdongti, the common community of East Asia. they're very worried about this
Yes.
East Asian co-prosperity
Yes.
sphere, but now they're willing to do that. And I think if it is done in a proper way, and so like ASEAN countries, not just ASEAN +1, +2, +3, but East Asian community, economic collaboration, and reduce tension. Of course, the tension is still there between China and Japan, between Korea and Japan, and so forth. I think culture may serve as a very important vehicle, and I hope Confucian ethics will become a new vision of ethics rooted in East Asia. But it's not Asian values rooted in East Asia, but universal values, just like some of the values rooted in the West have now become universal values. This kind of dialogical interaction. I have this vision, maybe wishful thinking, that through various kinds of intercivilizational dialogues, a new dialogical civilization will emerge. The civilization is characterized not only by competition, conflict, and tension, these are unavoidable, but characterized by both the willingness to dialogue, but also the actual experience or practice of dialogue at all levels, personal, national, regional, and civilization. So I think this is a new situation that merits a great deal of attention.
Yes, we have very rich tradition of this good harmony.
Last point. You know, I'm very moved by your recent, you just mentioned a recent decision to involve in a very important ecological project in China. And you may want to tell me a little bit more. You know, this is an attempt with NGO, to be sure, but a very large one, significant one.
Yes. So practically I'm involved now in the Eco-Peace Asia, which is involved in the anti-desertification work. So we are planting trees and vegetables in the dried sea lake in Inner Mongolia in China, bringing many hundred of students in the summers. But it's a very symbolic one. But I wanted to tell you that I think I heard that you are returning to Beijing University.
Yes.
I think it's very symbolic and significant that after spending so long time in Western countries and returning back to your own countries to follow up your purposes of the finding out this our traditional philosophical thoughts. I think I wish you all the good results and then good. I hope you could build a real good focal point in Asia, especially in East Asia, to connect and networking with other countries, and maybe we can hope that in East Asia, especially China, Japan, and Korea, where we have really shared very good common traditions and philosophical grounds, you could dig and find out and then establish a good Asian value traditions.
I was happily surprised. It was only about 2-hour flight from Beijing to Seoul. And we could actually fly to Tokyo and have lunch there and return in the afternoon. So certainly, geographically, it's a new realization for me. But my decision, after I've been teaching at Harvard for 81 years, I'm sorry, 81 years, that's too long. 30 or so years. Oh, I'm sorry, since 1981.
81.
So we're talking about
nearly 30 years.
Nearly 30 years. And I realize that I'm approaching 70, and if there's a period of time I can do things, basically self-education, frankly speaking. It is not simply, I know that a lot of things I can contribute. That may come, but I think it's self-education. I need to, the time is right for me to not consolidate, to think in a more integrated hopefully in a deeper way, of how many of the things I've been involving can be brought together as a new mode of thinking. So in a way, I look forward to a new style of philosophers. To do philosophy, hopefully, not simply to study about philosophy, to study about Confucianism, but to do philosophy with a view to the future, with human survival, human flourishing, as deep concerns, personal concerns, not just concerns of an abstract idea of human species. And in doing that, the possibility of tapping spiritual resources from the tradition I know well. But I want to do it in an open, pluralistic, and self-reflexive way.
Yeah.
So I say, I'm doing this, which means a Christian, a Jew, a Buddhist, a Taoist, someone who's committed to shamanist tradition, or even indigenous traditions, will be able to do the same. There will be a real intercultural communication. And this is now doable. I really believe it's doable. But I know if I don't do it, someone else will have to do it.
Oh, yeah.
If I'm committed to doing it, there's no guarantee, even though there's always hope, that it can be fully realized. But in any case, I want to do it. So this is the motivation. So whether something significant or efficacious will come out, that's something you can wish, or you cannot anticipate, or you cannot expect. What you can expect is what you're able to do yourself. You know it. I began studying this when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
So it's been going on for a long time. So the time to reflect upon it. I became quite aware when I was studying at Harvard. I realized that if I had no understanding of what happened in the People's Republic of China, no matter how hard I studied based upon scholarship in Taiwan, in Hong Kong and Singapore, that's not enough. It would still be very marginal. But since 1978, I returned to China in 1978 for the first time. And then 1980, I lived in China for a year. Since then, it was also the year I visited Korea to study in Peking. And I realized Confucianism is much broader than Chinese culture. Of course, it's part of Chinese culture, right? Because Taoism and others. At the same time, no matter how you broaden the idea of culture China, it is not broad enough to accommodate the whole Confucian tradition, because also Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese, and so forth. So I began to realize if I don't study Korean Confucianism, of course my study is still very superficial, or Japanese, not to mention Vietnamese, my education is not complete. And so I think this is still part of a journey. My education now, at least I know that in my generation, our view of Confucianism is much broader, because my teachers, even though they're great in understanding some of the major figures in Confucianism, but none of them took Twege seriously. None of them did any major work on Japan or Vietnam. So, and then of course I realized, if we look about the Confucian tradition from the Qufu, local culture of Qufu, to become the mainstream Chinese culture, and then from China to East Asia, from the 11th to 19th century. And now it's the time to go beyond even East Asia. But you have to be rooted in Qufu, China, East Asia, to be able to do that. But at the same time, you have to transcend all this rootedness in order to be able to do that. And I do believe that, I talked to many, many brilliant Western philosophers. I even got a chance to talk to Gadamer, Paul Ricoeur, I got to know him very well. And, Dao is a terrific scholar of political philosophy, and I've known him for decades, and quite a few in the United States. And I believe that the time is right that a true dialogical relationship can be established. But the precondition is that you have to do work comparable to what they've done in their own culture. So it's not just you communicate with your colleagues in Confucian studies, you need to communicate with someone in Christian theology. And you know the depth of thinking in Christian theology, or in German idealism, or Heideggerian thinking, or even Heidegger and Habermas themselves. You really need to have some sense of your own limitation, as well as your own strength. So that will be, I think, the beginning of certain kind of revival. That revival is basically very personal. But I make a distinction between personal and private. It's not private because it's accountable, it's open, it's publicly debatable. So that's, so far I've been doing philosophy by developing discourses, like Culture China, East Asian modernities, reflection on the Enlightenment mentality, and so forth. But now the time is right to do something more than simply develop discourses, but to have a focal point and try to do the kind of philosophy some of the most brilliant ones in the West have done. So it's not to emulate what they do, but it serves as a reference and also as a spiritual resource as well. So
maybe Jesus has been right in saying in Bible that prophets are not welcome and not respected in the at of hometown. You may be right that Confucius has been very influential in China and all other countries, but in some sense, because of his hometown, he has had to be also criticized and then neglected very much. And as we saw that in the Cultural Revolution, they have destroyed that Confucius tomb and then Confucianism. That cannot be happen in Korea or even North Korea or in Japan. So that, in that sense, we have kept also some good tradition of this Confucianism. Every year we are having the celebration of Confucius' birthday, and this the music and instruments are kept original. Yes. And we heard that the Chinese came to learn because they have lost all that. Yes. So we have brought that to the UNESCO heritage also. So in this sense, I think we have to share. So China and Japan, Korea, maybe we have brought Confucianism and Buddhism to Japan, and they have kept and maintained also very well and very systematically. Yes. We need to learn also from Japanese how they did and then develop this ideology. So I think we need this kind of interrelational development. I think is very important.
I edited a book entitled Confucian Traditions with an S in East Asian modernity. And I hope the form of East Asian modernity can also serve as a reference for the imagined East Asian modernity, or South Asian modernity, or Islamic modernity, or African modernity, and so forth. That's why the reason I talk about multiple modernities. But in any case, I do believe that a new vision of humanism, or new way of understanding the human, or rethinking the human, is right now one of the major philosophical tasks you have to confront. And the Confucian tradition, as a kind of spiritual humanism, in a way, is more equipped, suited to this new challenge than the secular humanism, which ignores nature on the one hand and the spiritual realm on the other. But the work is painfully difficult and has to be done not only systematically, but with imagination and with persuasive power.
Well, we can talk all evening, but I think we have to return to our session.
Okay,
so,
thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.